Okay, so let's unpack this. Um, what if I told you that poverty and riches, they aren't just, external things, that they're literally the offspring of thought? Can merely thinking about something, like really holding an idea tight in your mind, actually create tangible reality, make things happen in the world?
Well, that's a pretty radical idea for a lot of people, isn't it? It's definitely a bold claim, and it's absolutely the core concept we're taking a deep dive into today. Our source for this is Chapter 2 of Think and Grow Rich, and it's built entirely around this powerful idea, thoughts are things.
Right. And for you listening in, our mission today is to really drill down into the principles here. We're going to explore how specific people in the book actually applied these ideas. Sometimes it worked, sometimes, well, there's some painful lessons learned. And what do those real-world stories tell us about turning something intangible, like a thought or a desire, into, actual reality and overcoming the obstacles along the way?
And the stories are surprisingly vivid, really memorable. We're going to look at people like the man who showed up at Thomas Edison's lab, looked like a tramp apparently, but he had this total insistence on becoming Edison's business associate, not just an employee, mind you.
Right, that distinction's important.
We'll also dive into that almost heartbreaking story of the gold miner, the one who quit digging literally 3 feet from a huge fortune.
Well, that one's tough.
And we'll look at Henry Ford, too, how he tackled what his own engineers said was just impossible with the V8 engine.
Yeah, these aren't just abstract ideas floating around. The chapter really grounds them in the experiences of, well, real people. The core idea, right from the start, is that thoughts are things, powerful things, especially when they're combined with these very specific qualities. A definite purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for them to become real.
Exactly. It's that combination the source really hammers home. It's not just, casual thinking. It's thoughts that are infused with these specific traits that gain the power to actually manifest. Let's start with that story of Edwin C. Barnes, his journey to becoming Edison's business associate.
This story always gets me. Barnes started with basically nothing except this really intense, burning desire to work with Edison, and specifically as an associate, not just for him. That clarity, that definiteness seems absolutely key here.
It was.
But think about the obstacles. He didn't know Edison. He couldn't even afford a train ticket to New Jersey. Most people would hit those 2 walls and just say, okay, impossible, game over.
Yeah, but he didn't. The book says he somehow managed to ride the rods, basically hitching on freight trains to get to Orange, New Jersey. Shows up completely unannounced at Edison's lab. And Edison's description, it's very telling. He saw a man who, looked like a tramp, but his face just radiated this fierce determination. Edison said later, he knew from that very first look that Barnes was someone who would stick with a purpose until he achieved it. So he gave Barnes a job. But it was, a low-wage job, manual labor, not what Barnes wanted.
So he didn't get his goal right away. Not even close. Months went by. Nothing seemed to be moving him towards being an associate. But the source makes this really crucial point. Something important was happening internally.
Yes.
Barnes was intensifying that original desire. He wasn't tempted to just, give up on the big goal and settle for something easier like a sales job, even when those popped up. He stayed fixed on his original purpose, determined to get there even if it took his whole life.
And that level of intense, focused determination, it's presented as absolutely vital. The opportunity, when it finally came, didn't look like an opportunity at first. The book says it arrived disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat.
How so?
Well, Edison had developed this new dictating machine, but his regular salesmen, they weren't interested in pushing it. It just wasn't selling. They saw it as a dud.
And Barnes saw his chance in this unwanted device. How did his desire let him see opportunity where everyone else just saw a problem?
That's the key, isn't it? His mind was so laser focused on his goal being an associate that when this problem arose, his brain was sort of primed to see it as a potential path to that goal.
Makes sense.
He went straight to Edison, said he knew he could sell the machine, and Edison, remembering that look of determination from months before, gave him the chance.
Yeah.
Barnes didn't just sell it. He sold it so successfully that Edison gave him the contract to distribute it nationally.
Wow, just like that.
Well, not just like that, given the persistence, but yeah. And from that, he became rich.
The editors note he likely made millions, which they estimate, over $50 million today?
Something like that. But the real wealth, according to the source, wasn't just the money. It was proving the principle. That an intangible thought, that burning desire combined with definite purpose and persistence, It can be turned into material reality if you apply these principles.
He literally thought himself into that partnership, into that fortune.
Started with nothing but knowing exactly what he wanted and the sheer determination to stick with that desire until it happened.
So the core lesson from Barnes is a really defined purpose, plus that unwavering desire and being patient through the waiting that can turn apparent setbacks into unexpected doors.
Exactly. And that persistence piece is huge. It comes up again and again. Which brings us nicely to the next story, the one that gets quoted all the time from this book. Almost heartbreaking, really. 3 Feet from Gold.
Right, involving Rue Darby's uncle. One of the author's friends, Darby was.
Yep. The uncle got swept up in the gold rush fever, went out to Colorado, staked a claim, found some promising ore, but realized he needed proper machinery to get it out.
So he went back home, right? Raised money from relative.
He did. Got the funds, bought the machinery, and went back to the claim with his young nephew, Rue Darby.
Okay, so they're set up now.
They are. They start working the mine, and boom, they hit a rich vein. Things look amazing. The very first car of ore they sent out yielded fantastic returns.
Wow.
They figured just a few more carloads like that, and they'd be totally out of debt, making serious profit.
Living the dream.
They kept drilling, full of hope, and then, poof, it just disappeared. The vein vanished.
Oh, man. You could just feel the air go out of the balloon there.
Totally. They drilled like crazy, desperately trying to pick up the vein again. Nothing. Just rock. After hitting nothing for a while, they just quit, gave up.
Devastating.
They sold all their expensive machinery to a local junk man for just a few $100s and headed home defeated.
And the junk man. This is where it gets really painful, isn't it?
It really is. So the junk man, he wasn't a mining expert himself, but before just scrapping the machinery or randomly digging, he did something smart. He brought in a mining engineer to take a look at the claim.
Always seek expert counsel. That's a lesson right there.
Precisely. And the engineer, who understood things like geological fault lines way better than the Darbys did, he did some calculations, figured out where the vein likely shifted to, and his calculation showed it was just 3 feet. 3 feet from where the uncle and nephew had stopped drilling.
No. 3 feet? Seriously?
3 feet. And the junk man, thanks to that expert advice, dug those 3 feet and took millions of dollars in ore out of that mine.
Oh, that is brutal. Just brutal.
It's presented as this incredibly stark, painful lesson, isn't it, about the cost of quitting too soon, especially when the right expertise could have guided them just a little bit further.
But the story doesn't end there for Darby himself, does it?
No, and this is important. The source notes that while Mr. Darby lost out on that potential gold fortune, he actually recouped it many times over later in life. He became this incredibly successful life insurance salesman.
That's fascinating. How did that massive failure in the gold mine translate into success selling insurance? They seem like totally different worlds.
That's the critical piece, right? He never, ever forgot stopping 3 feet from gold. He consciously took that painful memory, that failure, and used it. He used it to teach himself the habit of persistence.
How did he do that?
He literally told himself again and again something like, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance.
Wow. That's some powerful reframing. Turning the pain of failure into a specific, actionable rule for himself.
Exactly. And the book says he became one of just a handful of men in the whole country selling over $1 million in life insurance annually back then. And he directly credited his stickability, his persistence, to the lesson he learned from his quitability in that mine.
So failure wasn't the end. It was the beginning of his real success.
And the chapter makes a really interesting point here. It claims the author's research, talking to over 500 highly successful people, showed that their greatest success almost always came just one step beyond the point where defeat had seemed certain.
So failure's like a trickster. It trips you up right when you're closest.
That's the idea presented. It tests your persistence right before the breakthrough.
The editors jump in here too, don't they? Connecting this back to Napoleon Hill's core idea that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success.
They do. They give examples like Jack Welch at GE having a huge plant explosion early in his career. Or Charles Schwab, who apparently flunked English and failed initially on Wall Street before hitting it big.
Right. And they list a whole bunch of other famous names too. Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, Oprah, Bill Clinton, Steve Jobs, Donald Trump, saying these are all people who had to face failure, learn from it, on their way to success.
The key point being they experienced failure, sure, but they weren't defeated by it. They didn't let it be the final word.
There's that great quote mentioned from Charles Kettering, the inventor.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
He said something like, from the time you're 6 years old through college, you take exams. If you fail once, you're often considered out. But an inventor. Kettering said an inventor might fail 1,000 times. But if they succeed just once, they're in. He called failures just practice shots.
Which totally flips the script on failure, doesn't it?
Completely.
It's not this terrible final judgment. It's just part of the process. Learning, refining, and this same lesson, this essential idea about persistence, about keeping on, it shows up again in another story Mr. Darby told the author. He called it his 50-cent lesson.
Ah, this one is so vivid. And kind of unexpected. Darby was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old mill.
Right, and this small child, a tenant farmer's daughter, came into the mill, asked for 50 cents for her mother, and the uncle, who apparently had quite a temper.
Yeah, known for it.
He just barked at her, refused, told her to go home, rudely.
But the little girl, she didn't move.
Didn't budge. He told her again, probably louder, maybe threatened her a bit. She still stood her ground, didn't move an inch. Finally, the uncle gets up from his work, starts walking towards her, looking furious, ready to physically remove her, probably.
And instead of shrinking back or crying,
Yeah.
what did she do?
She takes a step forward, looks right up into his eyes, and just screams at the top of her lungs, "My mom's gotta have that 50 cents.
Incredible. What happened?
The uncle just stopped dead in his tracks, stared at her for a minute, totally taken aback, completely disarmed by her sheer intensity. Then he just reached into his pocket, pulled out the 50 cents, and gave it to her.
Amazing.
The book says he sat back down and just pondered for like 10 minutes, utterly conquered by this tiny child.
And Darby witnessed this whole thing.
Yep. He was amazed, couldn't figure out what strange power she'd used. He said he didn't really understand it until years later when he was telling the story and finally connected it to the principles he was studying in this book.
And what was the connection?
He realized she had, just by pure instinct or desperation, stumbled onto that same powerful combination. Intense desire coupled with absolute persistence. She knew she needed that money and refused to back down.
And he started applying that lesson to his insurance sales, too.
Exactly. So it wasn't just the trauma of the gold mine failure. It was also seeing this raw, uncoached demonstration of persistence from a child.
That's fascinating. Two very different experiences teaching the same core lesson.
He says every time a potential customer tried to turn him down, tried to say no, he'd picture that little girl standing her ground in the mill, looking up at his big, angry uncle. And that image would spur him on. It gave him the courage to keep asking, to not take the first no as final.
And he credits a huge chunk of his success, those million-dollar years, to pushing past that initial rejection.
He does. He credits the better portion of his sales figures to asking for the order after the person had already said no. So both experiences a painful failure and the powerful observation they taught him that fundamental lesson. Keep on keeping on until you reach the goal.
These stories, they might seem simple on the surface, but they were clearly crucial for Darby. Because he didn't just live through them, he, analyzed them. He pulled out the valuable lessons about human nature, about willpower.
Right, and this raises a really important question the source tackles. How do you learn this skill? This art of converting setbacks, temporary defeats, into fuel, into stepping stones, especially, if you're young and maybe haven't had huge failures yet, or if you just don't recognize the significance of your experiences when they happen.
And the book's answer is, well, it's through studying and applying these specific 13 principles it lays out. It presents them not just as information, but as catalysts. Like the specific solution or plan you need might already be in your own mind, latent.
Yeah, just waiting.
Waiting to be sparked, to be activated by engaging with these ideas.
Exactly. The whole premise is that as soon as you start to understand and actually apply these principles, things start to shift. Your financial situation, or really whatever you focus on. It begins with cultivating a certain state of mind. One driven by a definite purpose and that burning desire we keep mentioning.
And interestingly, the source notes, it often requires surprisingly little hard work in the traditional sense once you develop that success consciousness.
Yeah, it's more about the mental alignment first.
But this requires overcoming some internal stuff.
Right.
Like believing certain things are just impossible, or falling into that trap of judging what others can achieve based on your own perceived limits or past flops.
There's that quick story about the Chinese student who thought Americans had weirdly shaped eyes.
Right, just because he hadn't seen many. A simple illustration of how our own perspective, our mental habits, can totally shape what we believe is real or possible.
Which is a perfect lead-in, actually, to the story of the impossible Ford V8 engine. Henry Ford had this vision. He wanted an engine with all 8 cylinders cast in one single block. A V8.
Which hadn't been done.
No. So he brought his engineers together, told them the plan, told them to design it.
And their response.
Yeah.
Their expert, unanimous response.
Impossible. They laid out all the reasons why, based on current engineering, current technology, it couldn't be done.
But Ford's reaction wasn't to debate the technical points.
Not at all. His response was simply, produce it anyway.
Just like that.
Yep. He told them straight up, stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how long it takes.
Now that is definiteness of purpose in action.
Wow. So 6 months go by, nothing, still impossible.
Another 6 months, still nothing.
Still no solution. The engineers are trying everything they know, hitting brick walls.
So a full year passes. Ford checks in again. Do you have it?
And they have to say, no, we don't. Still impossible.
And Ford's response.
Again.
Go right ahead. I want it. I'll have it.
Yeah.
Just unwavering.
Amazing persistence. And then
the book says, almost like magic, the secret was discovered. The engineers found a way.
we cracked it. They cracked it. Ford's relentless determination, his absolute refusal to accept impossible, had won out.
It makes you wonder how many impossible things are just waiting for that level of focused will.
Well, the editors add a useful perspective here. They note this isn't just about being stubborn. It's actually a kind of strategic planning technique used even today in really complex projects.
How so?
You operate under the assumption that a necessary piece of the puzzle, maybe a technology that doesn't exist yet, will be figured out by the time you need it. You plan as if it's possible.
Okay, so it's faith backed by action.
Exactly. The fundamental principle is knowing exactly what you want, holding that belief, that faith that it can be realized, and then just persisting until the how is found.
These stories, they really drive home that initial idea, don't they? Thoughts. When they're powered up by definite purpose, persistence, and that burning desire, they become these incredibly potent forces.
Absolutely. It all circles back to those famous lines the book quotes from the poet William Henley.
I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
Right. And the source argues the deep reason you are the master of your fate is precisely because you have this power, the power to control your own thoughts.
How does that work, according to the book?
It suggests your dominant thoughts act like magnets. Your brain literally attracts circumstances, people, opportunities that are in harmony with those prevailing thoughts.
So if you want riches, the claim is you have to make your mind receptive to wealth. Magnetize it with an intense desire for riches.
Essentially, yes. Become money conscious, as the book puts it, and then create and execute definite plans to actually acquire wealth.
And this isn't just presented as, like, philosophy, is it?
No, not at all. It's presented as very practical, proven methods. Methods the author claims have worked for millions of people.
There's that letter at the end of the chapter from Jennings Randolph that reinforces this, right?
Yes. He heard the author speak way back in 1922. And that story about Ford's V8, the emphasis on burning desire, it planted an idea in Randolph's own mind, made him determined to succeed even though he was starting with very little.
And he went on to have a pretty distinguished career.
He did, served in Congress for many years, and later he personally encouraged the author to write this very book, specifically to share this practical guidance on turning intangible ideas into tangible results, especially for people starting from scratch.
And the editors give us one last kind of pragmatic nudge at the end.
Yeah, what was that?
They remind us that these principles aren't really meant to be cherry-picked. They're presented as a whole formula.
Right.
Don't question it, do it, is basically their advice. The idea being, if you only try part of the formula and it doesn't work, you won't know if the principles failed, or if you failed to apply them fully and correctly.
It's really a call to commit to the whole process, isn't it? Not just dabble.
Okay, so let's try to bring it all back together then. Recap the core message from this deep dive into thoughts are things. The fundamental idea is your thoughts are real. They are powerful forces, especially when you inject them with definite purpose, unwavering persistence, and that burning desire for them to become real.
Yeah, we saw that play out with Edwin Barnes, didn't we? Turned a simple burning desire into a partnership, into a fortune, by not giving up, by being ready to grab opportunity even when it looked like a problem.
And then Rue Darby. learning that incredibly painful lesson, quitting just 3 feet from gold, but then powerfully using that lesson reinforced by that surprising 50-cent encounter with a kid, using it to build persistence and become hugely successful.
Yeah.
Shows the value of learning from failure and observation.
Definitely. And Henry Ford demanding the impossible V8, not because he knew how it could be done, but just because he wanted it. And he persisted until his team found the way. It highlights that power of focused will and maybe the strategic value of just assuming solutions can be found if you persist.
Right. So these stories, they all underline knowing what you want clearly, building that habit of persistence, seeing temporary defeat as just that temporary, not final failure. And also maybe knowing when to get expert advice, like the junk man did, unlike Darby's uncle initially.
And ultimately, the source tells us because you, the listener, have this inherent power to control and direct your thoughts. You are the master of your fate. These aren't just nice ideas. They're presented as practical, step-by-step methods that, according to the book, millions have used to get real results.
So here's something for you to mull over as we wrap up.
Yeah.
Think about applying these ideas yourself. What if the specific answer you need right now, the exact idea, the right plan to make these principles work in your life, what if it's already there, somewhere in your own mind, just waiting to be sparked maybe, catalyzed by really digging into and grappling with these very concepts we've talked about today?
And maybe think about Mr. Darby's big realization, too. Sometimes the key insight you need for your future success isn't about finding something totally new. Sometimes it's about finally truly recognizing a past failure. Not as a dead end, but as a crucial, powerful lesson. Maybe the exact lesson you needed all along to move forward.